where you're going to talk about sort of improving quality of care for ICU patients using computer vision. So that'll be, I'm sure you know what computer vision is, but it's just taking inference from images and videos and pulling some sort of conclusions from that. So this is what I've been doing with Datarwe. So this is going to be a little breakdown of what I'm going to talk about today. Just introduce myself to you, go through the motivation of sort of why we're doing this task, the background of what different facets of the industry come together to make this actually possible, the considerations that we need. So in every field, there'll be some things that you need to consider in the ethics side of things, or in the time cost or people cost side of things, to see if your implementation is actually viable in the real world. The uses, so what we actually plan to use this technology for. The implementation, so what we've decided on so far. This is very much in the prototype phase. If Meg still hasn't gotten results, we're definitely a year away from any results, so that's all right. And then a little quick summary at the end. So, oh, I have forgotten to do that, sorry. All right, so just a little introduction to me. So I also studied at UQ, graduated last year with a Bachelor of Advanced Science, majoring in physics with a minor in computer science. Was going to go into academia with physics, and then thought, don't really enjoy this. I think I'll try the computer science side of things. And turned to Datarwe. Some of my connections, got an internship at Datarwe, and yeah, enjoyed that a lot more midway through the end of last year. And then at the end of last year, got offered a job by KJR, who Kelvin explained before, is Datarwe's sister company. And from there, I've just been working with Datarwe for the moment on machine learning algorithm development and designing performance tools. So at the moment, I'm sort of going into the field of, you could say, inference of the inference. So once a model produces its output and gives you its results, you have to determine whether those results are actually of any use to anyone, or whether they've got errors in them, or whether something played up, especially when you're working in industry where these mistakes can have real world consequences. You need to make sure that what you're getting back from the model is ethically and logically right. So that's the sort of thing I've been working on at the moment, and going more into the test side of things, sort of similar to what Kelvin explained before. So yeah, the motivation for using computer vision in hospitals. So I'm sure we've all seen with the COVID outbreaks, the toll that it's taken on the health industry and all the hospital staff. They have a lot to do most of the time, well, all of the time, and a lot more to do with all of the outbreaks. So reducing the strain and the mental toll on the people who have to give critical care to us when we're in such dire circumstances is essential, as well as, in general, everyday work. Quality of care can be introduced just by reducing paperwork. So all the busy work that nursing staff and clinicians have to do, reducing that to reviewing data produced by a model, something that computers are great at, just producing just lots of the same data over and over. Reducing that enables them to actually increase their quality of care. So this gives them more time to deal with patients and actually looking after patients, rather than just writing out paperwork all the time. Also, it has the potential to improve accuracy of documentation. So when humans are stressed, humans make mistakes, humans can have bad days, machines just keep going. But the problem is, if you get the machine wrong, then it keeps doing the wrong thing. But that's a consideration for later. I'll speak on that later. But it has the potential to improve accuracy. So you can account for some errors in the program if you have, say, 60 frames worth of footage, and in 59 of those you see a person, and then in one of those someone's just disappeared. There's no longer a person. You can say, oh, well, there was probably a person there in all 60 frames. Whereas nurses would have to come in every half an hour rather than 60 frames a second. You get half an hour, one frame of data. I'm simplifying it, but yeah, that's sort of the premise. Plus, you can constantly monitor critical patients for key warning signs and symptoms. So along with the medical tools that provide warnings when someone's heart stops or when their breathing slows, you have the cameras providing monitors of their breathing, whether they sound like they're struggling to breathe, or what their breathing rate is, because all of this stuff needs to be done visually by a nurse. So if we can automate it with a camera, that would provide much better care for the patient. Also, as Kelvin said before, Datarwe does a lot of integrating with digital hospital systems and dealing with hospital data. So having the camera system in there, it will integrate well with those digital systems and provide just a single place, ideally, a single place for clinicians to get all their data rather than in disparate frameworks or different sets of paper. So just a bit of background. Obviously, we're using computer vision as part of this project. And I know you guys know stuff about machine learning, so I'll just do brief pros and cons on the sort of models that we're looking at. So we can see in this little picture here, we've got single object detection and we've got multiple object detection. So single object detection is obviously, image classification, localization, and then object detection is what we're doing with machine learning, things like YOLO, Detectron, SSD, all of that sort of stuff. So this is typically what we see in, the new models coming along. But this stuff up here, the image classification, is much more computationally efficient because it's not looking for each of the different objects. So what we try and do is we find a balance. It's back here, it's the most computationally cheap, most computationally expensive up at instant segmentation, but you get the most data out of instant segmentation. So in doing our edge processing, so working with on the camera to do the inference, we need to account for the processing that the camera has. So we can't just do everything in instant segmentation because it will likely be at 3 frames a second, and no one wants to look at that. That's not good for anything. So we try to blend a mixture of object detection, image classification, and instant segmentation in a sort of, I've heard it called a Hydra model. So different heads to the program, one input, multiple outputs. The other alternative is processing on the node, which isn't done on the camera itself, but just on a local system. This just reduces the amount of data that we're just shipping off to a server somewhere. So it reduces costs and also increases data security, which I can talk about now in our considerations. So you'd imagine people really don't like having a camera pushed in their face, especially, when they're feeling vulnerable already in an ICU ward. That's where we feel the worst. So privacy of patients and staff, as well as visitors, is paramount to this project succeeding, and assuring patients and staff of this privacy. So we can see here that training a model to detect faces and obfuscate all personal identification is one of the key steps, one of the key first steps, I should say, in progressing this model. Also the security of data captured, which is why I mentioned the edge and the node. So not having data traveling unsecured for long periods of time is essential in keeping it secure and not letting the wrong people get their hands on it. We need to make sure that we have accurate reports. There's no point having this technology implemented if it just doesn't do as good a job as nursing or clinician staff. It needs to integrate with existing infrastructure or resources so that there's less cost for uptake for hospitals and for people who already know how to use the existing stuff. So you want to be able to integrate with the people who already have the knowledge rather than retrain a lot of people, as well as making the data easy to use for clinicians. You don't want it spitting out just tons and tons, gigabytes of data that the clinicians just go, well, what does this even mean? Like hundreds of these frames are just a person lying there doing nothing. We need to add value to the data and clean it up, like Meg was saying before. A lot of the work that we have to do is in cleaning up the raw data and providing it in a useful form. So now I can get to the interesting stuff. So we can talk about the uses that we plan for this technology. So what we see here on the left is a notated, just a sample image of the sort of things that we would be looking for in a patient. So we can see they're intubated. We can tell that there's a patient and a visitor visiting. They've got arterial lines. They've got a cannula on the left and right hand. And then we can see their bed position is supine. That's not listed there, but that's another thing. So we can look at patient agitation, sleep quality, and movement throughout the room. So we can see if someone is not meant to be up, if they're in not a state to be up, we can see that they're moving and we can get an alarm to get someone in there. We can assure the rotation of bed position to prevent sores, as well as the relocation of catheters to prevent those contact sores also. We can also keep an inventory of what equipment is being used where. So losing equipment sometimes, not knowing where it is, not keeping notes up to date, that can just be automated with this process, as well as heat maps for foot traffic inside the rooms. So this is just a couple of the uses that we're thinking. So patient condition monitoring. So even if we've obfuscated a face, so that the data that comes out of it, we can't determine who they are, we can still pull out the facial landmarks, as we can see here. And what that means is we can observe the response of the patient or the staff or whoever, primarily patient, obviously. But we can see their response if they're in pain or if they're awake or if they're sleeping, monitor the quality of their stay and if they're experiencing distress without losing that obfuscation of their identity. Alternatively, we have infrared cameras to preserve their anonymity, and they do not display the identifying traits of their face. And by measuring the temperature fluctuations and the size of the chest area, we can measure their breathing rate and what breathing sounds they have, seen below. That's a bit small, I know. But we can see, using a microphone in the camera, instead of having the nurses having to listen to their breathing and determine whether their course, crackles, wheeze diminish, we can have a model determining that at any point in time. So we can have a higher resolution of what the patient's breathing is sounding like. As well as that, what I mentioned, the bed position. So regulation says that every half an hour, patients have to be rotated to avoid bed sores. So you have to, as a nurse, put a lot of this in your notes. You know, patient was rotated at this time to this position. And if that's not done, that's a big problem. Even if it was done and not noted, which sometimes can happen, that's a big problem. So when you have a camera monitoring this, you don't have to do that documentation. The camera makes sure of that and can send alerts. Oh, this person needs to be rotated in 5 minutes. You get the picture. So it just makes things, once again, easier, more accurate, and less room for error. Also, breathing equipment recording. So we can see what equipment the patient is utilizing to breathe, whether that be nasal prongs, high flow nasal prongs, ventilators, or a tracheostomy. And using that, we can determine sort of factors in their recovery. So how long their recovery period will be, or what sort of outlook do we anticipate for them. Also, what I mentioned before with the inventory of equipment, so determining where all of our equipment is, that assists in that as well. All right, so we finally get to the implementation. So we're using a YOLO V5 rapid object detection on the edge. So we're deploying them 2 cameras. Panasonic has released specific AI core cameras. So using those cameras, we can place AI models on the camera and detect on the edge all of these things with our own custom trained models. And from there, we can pull the data out of that and deal with that and add value to it. On top of that, we're using an image segmentation model. This is what I was talking about with the Hydra model. Image segmentation model for identifying what I mentioned before, the lines and the breathing apparatus, because those are very difficult for a object detection based bounding box area to detect, because they all just look like lines, little tubes running off of these. You need context as to where the position is, where it bends to, because they're very slim. Yeah, it's just difficult for object detection bounding boxes to actually get any sort of accuracy on that. And then finally, we got shape prediction models, like I mentioned before, the landmarks for face landmark plotting and the agitation detection. So I don't, once again, same as me, we don't have any results at the moment. We've got a small video that I couldn't add to the slide, unfortunately. I'll see if I can pull it up and just play it in the background while we do the outro. But just as a summary, we can see that machine learning models and algorithms can be utilized safely if we take the proper precautions to improve the quality of stay in hospitals, improve the quality of work, improve the accuracy of clinical notes, and all the while preserving our anonymity of the patient staff and visitors.
Well, there's the real-time video of sort of the anonymisation as the first stage. Well, thanks, Will. It's really hard doing a preso to people when you can't actually see the audience and know what's going on. So well done, mate. Yeah, we'll just wrap up. Yeah, what we wanted to do is give you a bit of flavour of what we do at Datarwe. We've got a couple of other UQ grads that are recently on board in here as well. It's not all, as we saw in the top of the pyramid, it's not all Kaggle world where there's all this machine learning. There's so much data preparation, validation, data engineering to get it to that. And then a lot of that, how do you trust it? How do you build up the reliability, the ethics, the governance? So that's what we're trying to do, is to make the life easier for researchers who want to do that. We've got cards up here of Steph. We definitely have internship and placement programs, and always out looking for more grads and things like that.